Ebony hadn't said much more after Boris explained how the dried meat was prepared for the troops. The look he had given her, like she was a complete idiot, shut her down. She would never admit to him, even though it had been hard to swallow and get it into her stomach, the dried meat had done wonders for her. She couldn't help wonder how a vagabond knew so much or talked so intelligently. The sun was bright and the terrain rough. The constant uphill slope towards the mountains was a constant battle. If it had been a smooth uphill climb, it wouldn't have been so terrible. But the landscape was filled with ravines, and there were a lot of them. The easiest part was walking down a ravine, if you could call it easy. Ebony had to step carefully so she wouldn't slip and fall to the bottom. She held onto bushes and small tree trunks, whatever she could grasp to steady herself. Her hands were aching and bleeding from jagged bark and thorny bushes. Climbing out of the ravines was even more difficult, especially if they were very steep. Ebony used rocks besides the bushes and small trees. Her arms would ache from pulling herself up. At the top, after one of the more arduous attempts to crawl out of a ravine, Boris stood waiting for her. He reached out a hand to her. This time she was too tired to protest. She grabbed his hand and let him pull her up out of the ravine. She sighed in relief. It looked the terrain had evened out a bit. Before Boris let her go, he took her wrists and held her hands palm up. "What's that?" Ebony jerked her hands out of his. "What's what?" Ebony had pridefully tried to hide her injuries. She didn't realize she had whimpered loud enough for him to hear her when she had accidentally grabbed another thorn. She hadn't known he was waiting for her at the top. For the most part, when she reached the top of one ravine, he was heading down the next one. She thought he wasn't paying her any attention and she had been scrambling nor to get left behind. "You have to take care of your hands," he said gruffly. "We have quite a ways to go yet before we get to the shepherd's trail." He pointed at a rock. "Go sit down." "What's the shepherd's trail?" Ebony asked wearily. She was too tired to get angry about him barking orders, and her hands were hurting badly. She walked over and sat on the rock Boris had pointed to. Boris followed her, stooping under the lower branches of the tree that covered them. He took out one of his flasks and gently cleaned the dirt out of the small cuts and scratches that marred her soft hand. He leaned the flask against the rock and grabbed his knapsack. He dug around a little bit before pulling out two small pouches. He opened one and pinched some kind of herbal mixture into the wounds. He pulled the drawstring on the pouch tightly before pulling it back into the knapsack. He took the other pouch and pulled out two strips of clean white cloth and tried one on each hand. He checked to make sure he had pulled them both tight enough, before closing the other pouch and placing it back in the knapsack also. The shepherd's trail used to be used a long time ago by shepherds, who would herd their sheep in these mountains before Illyrian and Peoria fought all the time. Once the two countries started warring all the time, this area became a no-man's land, because soldiers' dragons would eat any sheep they would see if they were hungry. When that became common practice, the shepherds refused to bring their herds up here anymore because it was no longer safe. Boris hadn't spoken that much to her since she had made him angry over her response about being poisoned earlier. Ebony had thought he hadn't heard her question or was still refusing to talk to her. She was glad to hear his voice. She was surprised that he had wasted his water on her hands. The only thing he had said to her all afternoon was to be careful about how much water she drank because it had to last. "Is it safe now?" she wanted to know. "I am not sure. It depends how much it is patrolled and how ardently they are still searching for you. Take a bit of water and some food. We are going to rest here a few minutes." Ebony had no idea what Boris had put on her hand, but she was amazed at how soothing it felt. She took a minute and dug around in her knapsack to see what food had been packed for her. There were some hard biscuits, some kind of dried oatmeal and rice cakes with berries in them, besides the dried fruit and nuts. Ebony passed on the dried meat she knew was in the bag and opted for one of the dried cakes and some fruit. Boris never said anything as she washed it down with a lot of water. Finally, Ebony felt like she had enough to eat. She put all the pouch back into her knapsack. Boris had already eaten and put his stuff away. He had sat on the ground leaning on the trunk of the tree that shaded Ebony where she still sat on the rock. "Are you ready?" he asked as he stood and adjusted all the stuff he was carrying to a more comfortable position. "As ready as I will ever be," sighed Ebony, standing. She too took a minute to make everything more comfortable. She was worried because she had finished one of the flasks of water and had started drinking from the other one. Will we be finding fresh water anytime soon? I have been trying to conserve water, but all this walking makes me thirsty. Boris grunted. We will be having an easier hike for the next couple of hours. We will stay on the ridge and end up in a valley that has water. I want to get there before dark. Since the terrain of the ridge isn't too bad, we need to pick up the pace. We will start gradually sloping down, so that should help. Ebony groaned inwardly as Boris set an alarming pace. She nearly had to take 2 steps to his long-legged strides. It wasn't long before she started panting loudly. Ebony wondered what he was doing when he suddenly stopped and picked up a pebble off of the ground. She caught up with him. He turned around and handed her the rock. Take a little water and rinse the stone off and put it in your mouth. What? Why would I do that? Ebony stared at him in disbelief. She wanted to slap it out of his hand. I am not putting that in my mouth unless you give me one good reason I should. Boris rinsed the stone off with his own water. He walked up to her threateningly. Put this in your mouth. Or what? Are you going to force me to if I refuse? Here we go again, complained Nova. The man is trying to teach you something and you are resisting him again. Take the stone and do as he says. Little princess, Boris said mockingly. I really don't care if you keep up with me or not. I am trying to help you. You can do it the hard way or the easy way. It's up to you. Ebony clenched her teeth. She hated it when he called her little princess. She looked at him with disdain and took the stone from his hand. She popped it in her mouth. She only did it because she trusted Nova, but she wasn't going to share her motivation with him. Good girl, Boris said to her in the tone one would speak to a dog. Ebony nearly choked on the stone. How dare he speak to her like that? Boris waved his finger at her and shook his head. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to hold that stone in your mouth so that you have to breathe through your nose, not your mouth. Breathing properly will help your stamina. It will also help your mouth to keep from drying out and keep you from feeling so thirsty all the time. He didn't add that it would keep her from talking too, which was a win-win for him. He turned and started walking again. This time he slowed his pace just a little. Ebony still struggled to keep up, but it wasn't as hard as before. At the peak of the ridge, Ebony could look down and see a little pond and a cascading waterfall. She hadn't seen anything so beautiful. She was so taken with the sight, she hadn't realized that Boris had stopped, and she ran into him. He chuckled. It's an awesome sight, isn't it? Ebony nodded. Drink some water. It's downhill from here, said Boris. Don't forget to take the stone out of your mouth. Ebony popped the stone out of her mouth. I am not an idiot, she said as she pulled the cork out of the flask. She took a big sip. Boris shrugged his shoulders. I can't tell sometimes. Ebony sputtered. Really? You think I am an idiot? The verdict isn't in on that one yet, he said gruffly. If you are done with the water, let's get moving. Ebony raised the flask to her lips one more time, this time taking a long drink. She defiantly pushed the cork in, when she had finished and slung the now nearly emptied flask around her shoulder. She proceeded to take it back off and repositioned her bow and knapsack. The bow was cutting into her shoulder. After she switched shoulders and was satisfied that she had them secured, she picked up the flask and swung the strap over the same shoulder her knapsack was hanging from. She glanced at Boris. He was watching her impatiently. It gave her a secret bit of satisfaction to make him wait on her. I am ready now. No, you are not, he growled. Get that stone back in your mouth. Ebony scoffed. Whatever. She hurriedly did what he said when she saw his impatience turn to anger. When he was convinced she was ready, he started down the ridge. This time Boris doubled the pace. Ebony was once again struggling to keep up, but since they were going downhill, it was easier to trot beside him and his long strides. The sun was getting lower behind them. It was the first time all day she had a clear sense of the direction that we're walking. In the forest, it had been hard to see the exact position of the sun. The air was becoming chillier as they got closer to the little valley that surrounded the lake. At the bottom, a fast-running stream greeted them. The water was crystal clear. Ebony could see various fish swimming around. Some of them were lounging in little pools along the edge, where the water was not disturbed by the flowing water. We might be eating some meat tonight, commented Boris. He had seen the fish too. That meant they were going to have a fire. Now Ebony was excited. She couldn't wait for the warmth of the flames and some hot food. Boris kept walking. Ebony popped the stone out of her mouth. "Where are we going to camp at?" she asked curiously. This place looked as good to her as any. She slipped the stone into her pocket. "As soon as we get closer to the waterfall," he replied. "We will cross to the other side of the water in the morning, but I want to camp closer to the crossing." Ebony looked ahead. She had no idea where there could possibly be a crossing up there. Suddenly, Nova broke her silence. "Tell Boris there are dragons headed our way, again," Nova said urgently. "If he knows about the crossing, then he knows where to hide." Ebony sighed. "Not again. Nova says there are dragons headed our way. She says you should know where to hide." "Follow me," said Boris. "Did she say how long before they get here?" "Tell him to run," instructed Nova. Panic filled Ebony. "She says to run. Give me your bow and knapsack," he ordered, "and keep up." Ebony obediently handed him the heavy items draped on her shoulders. Boris took off running for the waterfall.